Hello, it's Ewan Jones. I'm joined today with Mike Buchanan and Elizabeth Hobson of the political party Justice for Men and Boys. So I'm here with the J4MB team. So how's it going, guys?
Very, very well, very well. And we're here, of course, Ewan, in what is to me one of the best pubs in London, the Parcel Yard at the end of King's Cross Concourse, which doesn't sound very promising, but it's an extraordinary pub. And we're here today in the Loft restaurant. And this is the very table. This is the very table where a few months before the 2016 conference, a number of MRAs met Angry Harry for the first time, and sadly the last time because he died just 2 or 3 months before the conference. So Angry Harry, very, very important British MRA, and I'd like to toast his memory. Angry Harry. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Yes, so I agree, and unfortunately I never got to meet Angry Harry, so that was a shame. But yeah, obviously he did a lot for the movement during its initial stages.
Yep.
And yeah, I read some of his articles, and they were excellent and really looked into I guess, yeah, all of the issues that we talk about now as MRAs and anti-feminists. So today we're going to be talking about MGTOW, and yeah, so it's an interesting topic, and it's a growing movement, and it's a movement that is just naturally occurring, and a lot of men are finding that they're being pushed down this path, I'd say, and so some men are unconsciously going MGTOW, and others are becoming aware of what's happening as a result of the radical philosophy and ideology of feminism, and they're choosing to embrace this movement, to say that they're MGTOW. So if you guys could give me your understanding of the term and what's happening now, and let's just have a discussion from there.
Well, I mean, you know, I spoke to Peter Wright about the fact that we were doing this conversation the other night, and he said to me, you know, it's one word, MGTOW, or is self-determination, 2 words, 1 phrase.
Okay.
So that's what it is, you know. And I mean, I kind of, when you said it's something that men are being pushed into, I've got kind of mixed feelings on that idea, because on the one hand, you know, I spoke to Sydney MGTOW recently, and he said, look, you know, no man would swear off women unless he'd been burned in some way before. But on the other hand, you know, I'm reading about Peter Wright's idea of MGTOW being self-determination, and the other kind of way of being determination of self by others, which he calls DOSBO, which I think is quite a catchy phrase. And so, you know, I kind of question whether, if you've been pushed into it, are you MGTOW or are you DOSBO?
Can you explain DOSBO? I've not heard this term before.
So that's determination of self by others. So that is if you are, you know, making your decisions based on the needs and wants of other people. It's obviously, you know, often gynocentric.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I suppose as far as I can tell, or, you know, in terms of my own situation, I'd say it's both. It's you know, I mean, there is the will of other people and the society at large, and then it's how I deal with that situation. So it's, I mean, for me, I'd say I'm definitely MGTOW, and it's a choice to engage in an act of self-determination because of the ideology of feminism and the fact that it's such a toxic ideology. And just looking into, for instance, the issue, for instance, of you know, the family court system, seeing the complete joke that this has become, and the fact that the institution of marriage, which is one of the most important institutions, certainly in British culture, but in any culture around the globe, the fact that it's now become a joke in, you know, the 21st century, and it's just become a means by which women can use the system to screw men over and to gain all of their possessions, and also to then engage in truly Kafkaesque behaviour, where they take their, you know, the man's and their child away from the man, and they prevent him from seeing their children, and then hearing stories, for instance, of men being given access to their children, where they're allowed to see them once every 2 weeks in a visitation centre.
Visit or something.
Yeah, so it's like,
which you have to pay for.
Exactly, and it's like it's reducing them to the level of being a prisoner, and you know, it's like them being in a prison visit hall, and with you know, various supervised guards around, and then, I mean, this is just the worst possible atmosphere for the child, and I mean, there's almost no chance of the child doing any actual bonding with the father in this environment, but unfortunately that's the only time that this disgusting family court system is allowing men to see their children in. And obviously not every man who goes through the family court system or who goes through a divorce is subjected to this, but it's definitely a clear problem, and it seems that the more narcissistic and the more violent the mother is, the more the state then benefits her for being narcissistic and for being horrible to him, and he's just thrown out on the human trash pile. And just seeing that, and then, you know, it's then my response to that. So what am I going to do as a guy? Am I going to want to get engaged in this situation? Am I going to want to get a wife and some kids and then be subjected to that, or am I just going to turn my back and say no? Yeah.
But of course, it's been going on for decades, Ewan, hasn't it? This mangling of men in the family courts, and if ever there was an indicator that men as a class are not misogynistic, it's the willingness of men to still walk down the aisle.
Yeah.
It is just absolutely astonishing, and you know, most men at marriageable ages, which it tends to be early 30s these days, I think, rather than 20s, have known a number of men who've been absolutely tortured in the family, and yet they still think, well, this woman will be different.
Yeah.
And chances, you know, the chances are pretty high that that woman will not be different. But of course, you know, the law will change in coming years to give cohabiting couples the same rights as married couples, which basically means then there's going to be a whole cohort of men who've been in long-term relationships without getting married, who all of a sudden will be losing their houses, losing their kids. It's just astonishing, and you know, I'm surprised that that there's not a lot more men who are MGTOW. I mean, men can go from relationship to relationship, being screwed over by one woman after another, and then they look for another one.
Yeah.
It's there's something in the hard wiring of men.
Yes.
That makes them quite reluctant to take that step of being MGTOW, I think.
I think so. It's just the way you're brought up as a boy, I guess, and then, you know, you see all of the Hollywood films and all of the Disney films, and the girl or the woman is always she's always fantastic. She's always incredibly moral, always very headstrong.
Do you find that? Because I don't find that. I find that quite often they're absolutely insufferable, and, you know, like a lot of these, I watch family films with the boys. And there's this trope where, like, you know, the sort of hero tries to kiss the heroine or something. And she, like, physically assaults him. She, like, slaps him across the face or something. And every time it happens, we have a conversation, and we're like, that is unacceptable. If any woman ever does that to you two, show her the door. You know?
Okay, I mean, maybe I was thinking about the classic films as opposed to a lot of what's being made nowadays.
I think you go back to the black and white era there.
Right.
The golden age of Hollywood.
The golden age.
Yeah.
I don't know, that was always a particular trope within films that I saw, is that Yeah, I guess there was. I mean, I'd agree with the point you made that she often does. The heroine often does become quite irrational and quite angry at points. But also she's always cast, I'd say, as quite strong and kick-ass and extremely moral as well. Like just a beacon of morality.
You're watching different films.
And
You two,
I'd say, that's one of the big lies that we're all taught, when we're young through various stories, is that the woman being the beacon of morality.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But there's also, I think, the issue of optimism. I mean, most men are optimists by nature.
Yes, yeah.
And I hate to say this, Elizabeth, you present, but I think most women are pretty pessimistic and realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's normally in couples. I think it's normally the man who's romantic.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas, I mean, women, I think, are fiercely practical.
Do you think so? I mean, I would say it's more cynical than kind of practical. And what I'm thinking of when I say that is the kind of, how women respond, enabled by the state and encouraged by the state, to kind of crises in relationships. Because any long-term relationship is going to, come up against crises. And women's kind of response now, I don't think it's practical and kind of, even pessimistic. I think it's deeply cynical and destructive.
No, that's okay. So
What in any relationship you mean?
In any relationship.
Their response to when things go wrong.
No, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's very kind of fatalistic and.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot in that.
Nihilistic.
Yeah, no, I've seen a lot of that.
So what? Just to say, to try and move on, to try and cut him off. You mean?
Yeah, exactly. Like I think that there used to be an attitude that was problems come up and you work through them together and your relationship will be stronger. And it's actually summed up really beautifully in the ABBA song "One Man, One Woman."
Yeah.
That talks about a really difficult time in a relationship, but the fact that they're a unit and they're a union and they can work through things. But now it's like, as soon as you're not 100% happy in a relationship, as a woman, society tells you to, kick him to the curb.
Your happiness is everything. So women will talk to their friends, saying, "Look, I'm really unhappy," and they'll be told, "Well, then just make life so miserable that he will walk."
Yeah.
And you'll get the house. If you don't want him to see the kids, well, even if there are contact orders, well, just flout them. No one's ever going to do anything.
They're optional.
Yeah. And you'll get him out of your day-to-day life. You'll still get his money, because the state will ensure you still get his money, but you don't actually have to put up with him.
Yeah.
And it's to women in unhappy relationships, that alliance with the state is it's pretty tempting, isn't it?
I think it is tempting, and I think it's actually really unfair to women because I talk to mum friends of mine, and the ones who have done this kind of stuff, every so often the veneer will crack and they'll say something about how they miss their ex-partners, or they're not sure it was the right decision or something like that, and it's always very quickly followed with, but then I remembered what a jerk he was or something like that. But
so they are feeling some guilt.
I think so, and I mean, as far as the children go, I hear stories from people who, there's one whose child, his parents split up 7 years ago, but they get on kind of not terribly badly, and they will always turn up together to kind of school events like parents' evening and stuff like that, and every time 7 years later that this happens, he will always kind of have a conversation with his mum afterwards about well, could you not just get back together? And he's still got this longing for that family union.
That's the child.
The
sorry.
Child, yeah.
Okay, yeah. I think so.
I think that must be horrendously sad for a woman to kind of, have that conversation with her son.
Yeah.
How must she go to bed feeling after that?
And the impact of fatherlessness is so appalling on children. I mean, about 4 or 5 years ago, I was in a debate at Durham University with the lovely Julie Bindel, and I met a number of feminists at the bar afterwards, and every single one of them said to me that they'd been brought up by single mothers. Every single one of them. I didn't ask them. They just volunteered it.
Yeah.
So I mean, so the destruction of the nuclear family is basically a big driver of new feminist recruits, quite frankly. And those women are not going to have a healthy attitude towards men as they go into relationships, are they?
No.
They'll bail on their marriages pretty quickly because their mother will have told them all men are bastards and all this stuff.
What I'm seeing generally, and I'd say is this promotion of this radical feminist movement, and it's all over academia, and it's pretty significant now in the public sector, in all of these government jobs and all of these government industries, and the way I see it, it's just a movement that's entirely driven by female entitlement, and it keeps on suggesting to women that everything in their life is about their entitlement, what they're entitled to, what they deserve, and none of it's about what you can actually create, what you can actually do to make things better, to actually make your own life better. And so I find the whole thing ridiculous because I'd say in my own life, all of the positive changes have been when I've made the decision to try and make my life better.
But it's, I mean,
for instance, not making like when I was younger, I used to go out and drink. I'd definitely say too much. So a positive change has been to not do that. To stop doing that. And as a result, I don't have as many hangovers and generally have better health nowadays. So, I mean, it just seems that all of these positive decisions are things that, decisions we actually make to make things better. Whereas the whole feminist movement is just based in this toxic female entitlement atmosphere.
Toxic femininity.
Yes, yeah.
Did I say that right? But I mean, feminism is a number of things. Of course, it's a religion, it's a cult, but it's also a political movement based on whining.
Yeah.
I mean, women. When you look at a lot of the stuff that women are demanding, it's just whining. They demand equal outcomes. Let's say in the number of MPs, even though men apply to become prospective candidates, 10 times more often than women. But it is just whining, and it kind of appealed. I mean, Laura bloody Bates this week was complaining about creepy driving instructors. So of course, then there's a million young whiny women complaining about their creepy driving. I mean, should there be a test for creepiness? It is. I mean, these are it is perhaps mild, sometimes strong, narcissistic personality disorder, and feminism absolutely it's the embodiment of that, I'm afraid.
What you remind me of in this is there's a book by Naomi Wolf called Vagina.
Yeah.
Which says it all really in terms of kind of narcissistic self-obsession, doesn't it? Calling a book Vagina. And in it, there's a section where she talks about all of these women she knew, and they were married to kind, successful, decent men, and they had children together, and then the women decided to leave them. And when she asked the women why, they basically said that they were just generally unsatisfied, just generally not very happy, kind of thing. And I thought, oh, did you say, well, that's not acceptable to leave the father of your children because you're just a bit bored or something, but Naomi Wolf doesn't say that. Instead, this is Vagina is a book written for men and women. She's very specifically wants men to read it too. And she explains, she's got this long list of entirely contradictory things that all men must be. They must be very attentive to their partner's needs, but they need to be exciting and edgy, and they need to be kind of they need to surprise them with gifts, but they mustn't be too needy or too kind of obviously in love with them or anything like that. It's just this long ridiculous list of things that nobody could ever hope to kind of
have in one person.
And there is literally nothing that she suggests that women might do to make their relationships more successful. Nothing. Women just you know, just be, and you deserve this like ideal man who is all kinds of
Yeah.
like
Who needs to work constantly to make
impossible
you
things.
happy?
Yeah.
Because you can't do that for
Who needs
yourself.
to like, and he needs to literally reinvent himself like every 10 minutes to keep you interested.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know.
It is stunning.
It's not on my reading list. Don't know about
Right.
you, Ewan.
No.
I did the
I think
work
I'd
so you
explain on
didn't
day
have
one,
to.
on page 1.
Okay, so just to drill down into the figures, in 1972 there were 426,000 marriages in England and Wales. In 2015 there were 239,000 marriages. So there's a massive drop there.
Yeah,
If we look at the birth rate as well.
Sorry, Ewan, just staying on that. If you look at it per million of population, that's a decline of slightly over 50% in the marriage rate in that time.
That's interesting, yeah. And for the birth rate as well, it's a similar decline.
Yep.
From about 3.0 in 1970s to 1.8 or 1.76, I believe is the last reading we have.
It's about 40% decline. In the space of,
So
in 10 years,
2017, 1.76 children per woman, and yeah, in 1964 it was 2.93.
Yeah.
So we're seeing a massive reduction in the marriage rate and a massive reduction in the birth rate. And I do have to mention that we are, you know, since the 70s and certainly since 1997, we are seeing massive amounts of immigration into the UK, and some of the immigrant communities do have a more traditional value system, and so within those communities we're seeing a higher marriage rate and a higher birth rate. So the fact is the figures are even worse than what they suggest. So I think the situation is pretty bad, and it's getting even worse. And I'd say certainly with radical feminism in the mainstream media, that it's been completely batshit insane for the last 5 years, since around 2013. You know, I used to read newspapers and watch the TV, and when I was younger, we didn't have all of these crazy people like Laurie Penny or Laura Bates, and they appear to have emerged on the scene since around 2013, this completely radical feminist movement. And I'm sure you will agree with me, if you watch the BBC, you know, in the last few years, it's non-stop radical feminism, like all the time.
I think it goes back a long way on the BBC.
You reckon a long way?
A long way. Certainly 20 years, and perhaps more than that.
Right.
I mean, Women's Hour, that goes back to the war. I'm not saying that they were too feminist, you know, at the end of the war, but no, it goes back a long way.
I'd agree with that. I just think, I mean, obviously, I don't watch it, but the times I've been forced to watch it, what I see now is that it's all the time. The radical feminist arguments and the content, it's like non-stop, you know, once every 30 seconds or so there's another radical feminist nail that they're trying to hammer into your subconscious whenever you watch it.
And it goes into everything, you listen to drama on the BBC, but radio or TV. It is just low-level feminist propaganda. You know, the women are always strong, smart, amazing. The women are, the men are always dolts. They're lazy, they're stupid, and it's just, you know, I mean, people internalize this stuff decade after decade. You know, it's hardly surprising that you know, men's morale as a gender or a sex is rock bottom, and it's not getting any better.
Yes, yeah, and certainly I'd say with the education system as well. This has been happening for a long time. It's become increasingly feminized, and at primary school level in the UK, we're seeing around 90% of teachers are female, and we're now seeing various projects like a lot of primary schools are trying to ban games like tag and British Bulldog, being played at lunchtime, trying to ban games, trying to ban break times altogether.
Well, there's the revisionist history that's being taught as well. You know, my kids' school, you know, we're in line with, I assume, every school in the country, because, you know, they all have the curriculum handed down from central government, don't they? You know, I saw it, they send out the curriculum, and I saw it at the beginning of the year. It said, you know, we're going to be learning that it's 100 years since women got the vote. And I was like, you know, I looked at it and I thought, half the story.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they've literally covered it quite extensively in various, you know, in history and in kind of their personal, social and health education lessons, you know, in assemblies, and it's always only been half the story. And to go along with it for the entire year, they've had a theme running that is like inspiring women. And so the halls are all filled with pictures and displays about inspiring women,
and you get boys growing up in that environment.
They've had like inspiring women. They put a call out for parents for mothers, who were leading, you know, interesting lives and had interesting jobs, to come in and talk to the kids to inspire the girls.
Wow,
and I did apply and didn't hear back, actually, but I was quite keen to go in there and talk about my work that I do with J4MB. And so, yeah, you know, and it's like the Doris Lessing kind of quote, isn't it, about all the girls sitting kind of with this kind of fat complacency because they're the
I think she was talking to a classroom of 10 and 11-year-old pupils in the UK, and there was a feminist teacher who was given a history lesson on how men had always oppressed women, and her comment was that she looked out across the faces of all of these children and saw the girls sitting there fat with complacency,
that was the expression.
And the boys sitting there utterly dejected and apologising for their existence.
And I think this goes back to the 80s or something. This goes, or the 90s. It goes back a long, long way.
And so it seems to me, and we're seeing this, like through education. I mean, there's all of the work that William Collins has done on this topic as well. And I remember my talk with him where he discussed the fact that in primary school, the primarily female teachers are benefiting the girls in the class and are marking down the boys for being boys. So there's the promotion of the sisterhood there, and obviously this banning of rambunctious behaviour in the, you know, of competitive games and sports,
and the drugging of boys.
And then there's the ADHD stuff as well.
Absolute
on top
bloody
of it.
Scandal. I mean, but I mean, it's, you know, the education gender gap, as William Collins put in his very good blog piece, goes back to, I think, 1987-8, with the replacement of O levels by GCSEs, and the education gender gap appeared that year. It's been with us ever since, and of course, to the Department for Education, there is no problem.
No.
I mean,
it's just more equality.
Yeah, I mean, the last two previous education secretaries have been feminists. To them, there is no problem. Why is it a problem if boys are disadvantaged? I mean, absolutely no problem there at all.
Yes, because then that reflects and promotes the idea that men have always oppressed women, and so now women need to oppress men because that'll be equality, and it'll be retribution for past injustices wrought by men upon women if we screw over all of these boys growing up and
but it's
going
all,
through the education system.
It's all, as Elizabeth said, it's revisionism. I mean, boys did not do better than girls pre-87. You know, within a percentage point or two, that, you know, they've done equally as well. But there's just, you know, I mean, the mainstream media just never covers the counter arguments, does it? Yes, we have on the internet. There's just extraordinary stuff. Of course there is, and it gets better with each year. But the mainstream media, you find on almost a daily basis that some bloody journalist will talk about the gender pay gap, let's say, and it's like, do they not know? They can't all be radical feminists, but there's just a lack of, I don't know, curiosity in journalists, or perhaps your career would be over pretty quickly if you started to tell the truth. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lack of courage that goes on. You know, I mean, when we were speaking to Philip recently, he was saying that he knows people in the BBC who are conservative and, you know, would never admit it. So, you know, I mean, I feel a bit harsh saying it's a lack of courage, because, you know, it's also a kind of rational kind of preservation.
But you speak to people at the BBC, and they do not see themselves as biased in the extreme. They're astonished. They are genuinely astonished at the allegations of bias.
You know, I do have a certain level of kind of sympathy for them, because, you know, people of a certain age, particularly, who aren't maybe as savvy about kind of social media and you know, how to investigate alternative sources of information. You know, they've been fed this stuff their entire lives, from the education system, from the media, from culture, from, you know, non-governmental organisations, from like the UN. You know, the UN has their Day of the Girl Child, and every year they make a big fuss about how there are girls who aren't going to school. And it's roughly half and half, girls and boys who don't get schooled in the world. There's very few places where it's a specifically female problem. But, you know, when you're kind of bombarded with this, and there is no, you know, kind of counter-argument that's presented in an accessible way, you have to go and look for it. You have to, like, you know, make a conscious decision, and
you have no reason to look for it unless somebody sort of prompts you in that direction.
Yeah, that's the a priori assumption used by the mainstream, the establishment, certainly the mainstream media, is that women are oppressed and have always been oppressed by men. So that's their starting point.
Yeah, it is.
And that fact, as they call it, can never be challenged. And so we just need to keep on doing more and more to redress the balance. And it doesn't matter how hate-mongering you become, how much of a radical feminist you become, you know, how autocratic you become, that balance can never be addressed, actually. And it always needs to be attacked, because it's always there.
You've got to smash that patriarchy.
Yeah. But it's an incredible thing, you know, you look at, I mean, decade after decade, MRAs have turned out rational arguments, everything from the, just on everything.
Well, I mean, since the dawn of feminism, MRAs have been doing that.
But in terms of, you know, the impact on society, I mean, facts just don't matter. And MRAs are not good at presenting stuff rather than rationally, emotionally, because that then looks like men whining. And it's you know, and it's what William Collins writes about, you know, the empathy gender gap. That kind of like kills that stuff right at the start.
Okay, so just moving back to education, what we're seeing now, I'd say, is through primary school and secondary school, is a feminization of the education system, and it's now become a system that benefits girls. It helps them, you know, in terms of it focuses on the way that girls learn, and it is a system that's inspiring towards young girls. And, you know, there's lots of inspiration to be offered to them. There's none offered to the boys. They are demonized, and they're not treated by the teachers well. And a lot of them are failing in this system. And what we're seeing as a result of that is far fewer boys than girls are now going to university. And we're seeing a massive unbalancing in terms of the number of students going into every single subject. But crazily, the feminists only focus on the STEM subjects, where there is a small number of, you know, where there's still an imbalance in that more men are going into these subjects than women. But overall, far more women are going into university than men, and women are dominating the universities.
Yeah, but I think if you refer to STEM as with two M's,
Yeah.
including medicine,
Yeah.
I think there's more women. I
Yeah,
think
I
there's
believe
slightly
so.
more women.
Yeah.
So there's no problem there.
There's vast numbers of people in medicine,
indeed.
and most of them are women.
Well, 70% of
Yeah.
them are women, and which is part, in large part why the NHS is in crisis. Because you have to train 2 women to get the lifetime work output of 1 man. I mean, full
Right,
stop.
right.
I mean, the best thing that the NHS could do would be to stop training, or medical schools stop admitting women for 2 generations.
Okay,
And,
yeah.
and a fair number of the problems affecting the NHS would come to an end. But yes, it's always this double standard. Something that really sticks in feminist craw is the fact that women tend not to want to go into things like mathematics and physics and engineering, and they think there are barriers. But at the end of the day, countries where there's the most gender equality, like in Scandinavia, women are less inclined to go into STEM subjects than they are in places like Iran. Where there's strong, but so there's all this wittering about.
When the reason women are going into it in Iran is because they need the money.
They need the money, yeah.
And when you have the kind of security of the welfare state, which is giving you more kind of choice over what you do with your time, women are not choosing to go into these things.
No, they're not.
It's out of necessity, not choice.
But we come back to what is it apart from whining? We don't as a country need more women engineers. We need more engineers.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem, of course, that 90% of psychology students are women. No problemo there. Or 95% of speech therapists are women. But this, it's never the whiners. It's never the Laura Bateses of this world that are ever going to be doing an engineering degree.
Yes. Yeah.
But they just want to bully, cajole, other women into it.
Yes, they always talk about this. It's a small number of subjects where there's more male students than female students, and they completely ignore most of the university subjects where there's far more female students than male students. And I mean, you spoke about. I guess you spoke about engineering, and I think this is another significant problem now that has developed, is that the country as a whole, I'd say certainly the UK, in terms of where our tax money goes, the 2 main areas where it goes to are the NHS and the welfare system. And so what we're seeing there, I'd say, is that these 2 industries that focus on caring for people, that focus on empathy, and that's where most of our tax money is going. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because obviously Great Britain became we forged the modern world, and we did so by setting up trade routes around the globe, and by being one of the greatest nations in terms of engineering that has ever existed. And I'd say what we're seeing now, just one of the effects of feminism, is that we've taken our focus away from engineering, from actually building civilization, from actually improving technology, from actually striving forward. And now our focus is much more on healthcare and on caring for people generally through the welfare system too. And I think there's a problem here in that if we become too focused on just caring for people rather than on actually building and improving our civilization, I think that's just another another problem that's been brought in by this feminist movement and this new feminized mindset. And
I agree totally. Of course, as a class, women are net recipients of benefits. So that whereas men pay 72% of the income taxes in this country, driving things like the £30 million initiative to have more female engineers. It's really we are paying our own muggers.
Yeah.
Here's some money, please mug me. But of course, that goes back to men. I mean, outside of this movement, anyway, not seeing themselves as a class because, men get their merit at the individual level. It's like Aaron Pitsey says, females are born valuable, and they soon learn it. Whereas men are born valueless, and they soon learn that.
But what women don't learn is that their value does depreciate.
Yes.
Yes. which is another lie of the kind of feminist sisterhood, which comes up and kind of bites women on the bum when they find themselves like 40 odd and childless. I do want to say a word of defence for teachers, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Oh, okay. Do you want to go ahead with that now?
I want to say a word of defence for teachers because, I've got 2 boys in primary school, and I have to say all of his teachers, including the headmistress, have always treated him very well. And the headmistress is actually an interesting character because, she's come in and she's really turned the school around. She came in just before we did, and it was a not very good school, and it's now, an excellent school where people really want to send their children. But, every time someone leaves, she seems to employ a new male teacher. I suspect that our ratio of male to female teachers is significantly kind of more equal than a lot of places. But, I think the problem with boys in primary school is more systemic. I think there is a problem with the revisionist history that I was talking about earlier. And I think that probably comes from a point of ignorance. I wrote a letter to the headmistress, and she thought I'd made good points and passed it on to the head of history, who never got back to me. But my suspicion is that he probably just didn't know the real history.
Fair point.
And, in terms of, they do care about the boys, and they do, support them, but there's the way the curriculum is, and the focus on the academic subjects, and the focus on kind of sitting down at desks and writing is not ideal for a lot of boys. So I think it's more of a kind of top-down change that needs to occur. I don't think it's teachers not treating boys well.
But
although there is, I've seen the research about teachers marking girls up and marking boys, especially ones who exhibit boyish behaviours, down. I have seen that.
But I think you're also lucky in that school. Somebody posted a comment just yesterday. I can't remember if it was a man or a woman, but that they'd known a headmistress of a primary school who hadn't recruited a male teacher in 25 years, on the simple basis that and she was quite open with this apparently, that any man who wants to teach young children must be a paedophile. And I'll bet there's a hell of a lot of headmistresses of primary schools that think that, whether they say it or not.
Incredible.
It's unbelievable. I think I think there's a problem generally with the focus being on how girls learn, on creating an atmosphere in the school where everyone's feelings are listened to, on encouraging expression rather than on encouraging competition, which I'd say...
And the whole anti-bullying thing, which kind of, convinces children that they're kind of these poor victims of kind of awful behaviour, when it's just a bit of, the rough and tumble of kind of life. And they need to learn to deal with themselves.
They need to develop resilience.
Yeah, that's not taught for boys as well.
Although,
getting them to stand up to bullies.
If you kind of recall how boys are treated, or the myths that are propagated about how men have always oppressed women, and they all have this kind of original sin and this guilt. you know, I think a lot of boys kind of internalize it, and it harms them and makes them very nervous and weak and kind of, you know, trying to appease women and please women.
Yeah.
But the ones who see through it, I think, come out even stronger. You know, the boys who do kind of go to university and they get kind of discriminated against and...
Yeah, it's interesting. It sort of reminds me of Paul Elam's point that what one measure of a man's mental health is his readiness to say no to women. And I guess boys are brought up with this, as you say, original sin. That's you know, with his guilt, and that must translate into a reluctance to be even moderately assertive. And when a female, whether it's a girl or a woman, wants something, and just instantly comply with it. And I guess I don't know.
Unless you react against it, which I think some do, and you know, I think that's probably, it feeds into making these men who become more assertive in the workplace and more able to fight their corner and to, you know, ask for that pay rise and do it convincingly, because, you know, they've come from this training ground at university of having to fight for their very right to even be in that institution. Whereas women are kind of in university, they're like really mollycoddled and supported through everything, and their hand is held, and you know, we'll do this for you and we'll do that for you. And then they get into the workplace, and you know, they need to negotiate a pay rise, and they're on their own, and they can't do it because no one's ever toughened them up.
And you take Parliament, 650 MPs, only Philip Davis MP is ever willing to stand up for men. You know, they. You know, all the, you know, pretty well, you know, all of the men have folded. Women whine about something, and and men fall over each other to give them it. It's so toxic.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of information you've brought up there. So I think it's, I mean, I'd say through the education system there is a problem, and it's this lack of focus on actually. On encouraging competition amongst the pupils, the students, and also, I mean, like, you know, we know the best ways of getting boys to learn is to, for instance, for the teacher to say to them, "I bet you can't do this," and then, you know, they're prepared to go to any lengths in order to actually solve the problem. When the teacher says, there's no way you'll be able to do that. So, yeah, generally moving on to MGTOW, what we're seeing is that all of the institutions are becoming more feminized, and this definitely starts with the education system, because that's obviously the primary institution that young people engage with when they grow up and then go on to do all of these different jobs. And men are being cast out of the workplace, especially the public sector. So yeah, that's I'd say it's a lot of politics, it's the NHS, it's the civil service, it's all of the government institutions are becoming radical feminist institutions, and they're becoming anti-male. And yeah, we're seeing the Me Too campaign now. And, you know, recently we've seen the anti-Philip Green campaign. I'm not sure if any of you have been following that one.
Yeah, but I think, just to go back to your point.
But with that one, there's a focus on this, you know, rich businessman, and apparently he was in meetings a lot. He would say comments like, well, basically suggesting that he would slap the women's bottoms. And also... So
he didn't slap the women's bottoms, but he suggested that he could potentially...
Yeah, that was it, yeah. And this was, you know, splattered all over the pages of the Mirror I was reading it in. And I think it was yesterday's paper, one of the allegations was that he asked a woman if she would accept £1 million for him sleeping with her. So it's the same thing as the plot to the 1993 movie Indecent Proposal.
Ericsson's ex-girlfriend, what's the England manager?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, 5 million. You know, but you know, it's just a question of the price, and he got the price wrong.
Mm-hmm.
That was the problem.
And so we're seeing now, I mean,
But do you believe
basically
it?
there's all of the accusations of sexual harassment, and that's becoming increasingly minor. But there's also all of these new accusations of inappropriate behaviour. You know, he said something inappropriate.
What
He
a
said this
weasel
comment,
word that is.
which
What a weasel word
yeah,
that is.
yeah. And
Oh,
so
sorry.
all of these institutions are just becoming more and more anti-male, and they're just promoting this ridiculous female supremacy attitude. And any man who is deemed, you know, to be toxic for any reason, he can instantly be destroyed and his life ruined. And the whole thing is just becoming more and more autocratic.
It's deeply heterophobic, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
There's always been sort of a sexual frisson between men and women in the workplace. I mean, I mean, a large proportion of couples originally met in the workplace. If you're going to stop that, my God, you know, you're going to stop a hell of a lot of couples.
I think so, and I think, you know, getting on to my major point, this is why so many men are going MGTOW, and so many women are now finding out that they can't actually get into long-term relationships. And I mean, the whole, you know, dating situation has just plummeted. You know, it's like an airplane that's fallen out the sky and has now crashed into the mountain. And I mean, at the heart of it is this radical feminist movement, which has thrown a spanner in the works and has stopped men and women from relating to each other the way they always have. Yeah, yeah.
But I think, just go back to the public sector, I mean, I think that was pretty well occupied by radical feminists a long, long time ago. You know, they are, you know, when people talk about radical feminists, they tend, there tends to be an assumption that these are sort of like peripheral characters. But I mean, I think the public sector has been infested. This is probably the best word, isn't it? Infested with these damnable women for probably 20 or 30 years, depending on the area. So now we have the army trying to get women into the SAS.
Yeah, yeah.
And the only way they're going to do it is to do what they've done in the fire service, the prison service, the police, which is to reduce the physical the physical requirements. So what's going to happen in the event of war is that these women are not going to carry the same as the men. Across the moors, wherever, the men are going to have to carry more kit than they already do, just so these women can be sort of pretendy soldiers.
I'm not sure if you've watched there was the recent SAS show, and I forget that, like, I'm not sure if it was, I think it's SAS, Are You Tough Enough?
Right.
And so we've had the first 3 seasons of that, and it's all been men. And the thing is the physical requirements for getting in are ridiculous. I mean, they have, one of the activities they do is called, I think it's called...
I'd be fine.
Well, it's the sickener. The sickener is one of them, and they push these men to the point of exhaustion, to the point of passing out and of throwing up. And you know, so they're getting these guys to go not at 80%, but at 100% for you know, for hours. And I mean, it's like saying that, you know, we're now going to have women in the England rugby team. I mean, it's just utterly absurd. But that's, you know, that's what they're suggesting, is that they can bring women into the SAS.
Well, do you remember there was footage of some recruit being trained? It was a female recruit, and her, like, commanding officer was, you know, giving her a hard time. He was, like, you know, shouting at her, and she kind of creased into tears, and there was a big outcry. And the officer ended up being disciplined over his treatment of her.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's like, if you can't handle being, you know, screamed at in the face, you're not the material that can cope with, you know, going out and killing and seeing your mates blown up and, you know, being in that kind of high stress environment.
Yeah. And, you know, men will compromise the position to look after women. It's just, you know, it's in the hard wiring. I mean, the Falklands would probably be run by the Argentines
I'm
now.
all for, women being allowed into the army, but it has to be at the same standard. You know, if they can reach the same standards, fine. But it's not many women who can, and we shouldn't be making allowances.
Yeah, but even on the front line, even if
there are people's lives at stake.
I mean, maybe one in, I don't know, 100,000 women can, or whatever it is, could make it there. But I think, but it would still be compromising the mission. That's the point I'd take. I don't think men are going to, men are just hardwired to protect and save women, and they will compromise the operation.
Yeah,
they're hardwired to do it.
Yes, I think I think it'll be an absolute disaster what they're doing, but apparently they're doing it anyway, and it's in every industry. We're seeing this attack on men, and I mean the victim is the industry itself, which becomes less and less productive and more based on constant female entitlement and on making things nice for this woman and making things nice for that woman, and if there's some creepy man who asked her out the other day and she's a bit annoyed by him or something because he's asking
Sexual
her
harassment.
to do extra work, then sexual harassment. And I mean the whole thing is ridiculous, and I just see more men going MGTOW, getting out of the system and going into a lot of jobs that aren't, that aren't kind of promoted by the university system, but are useful jobs anyway that prop up the economy, and so there's money to be made in these jobs. I see the construction industry as a bastion
there are
of...
some MGTOW who don't want to pay tax because it's paying into the system, like a gynocentric system. So there's also kind of, very... MGTOW living very simple lives as well.
Yes.
As MGTOW earning a lot of money.
Oh, so not earning much money. And,
on purpose.
Yeah.
As a deliberate kind of form of protest.
That's interesting. That's good. Yeah. I'd just like to bring up my own family now, and I don't want to wear too much dirty laundry here, but just to say I'm 35 now. And I mean, I'm single and have no intention of marrying. And my two sisters are both 31 now, both single, both unmarried, no kids. My brother is 28, or stepbrother 28. Also, I mean, well, he's got a girlfriend, but unmarried and no kids. So, I mean, in the past, you wouldn't see this situation too much, would you?
No. I know through one of my kids a number of young women in their sort of early to mid 30s, absolutely drop dead gorgeous young women, very very bright, and they cannot find partners. Whereas 2 generations ago, there would have been a queue of like 5 or 10 men for every one of those women, and of course the problem is that. That a lot of these women are hypergamous. So if they're earning £50,000 or £60,000 a year, let's say, as executives, the pool of men who they're attracted to is not it's a pretty small pool really, and the men in that pool don't struggle to find women. So it's not surprising that there's just now a huge cohort of men that are basically whether they call themselves it or not are incels.
Yes,
involuntary celibates, and I think there's an interesting crossover between MGTOWs and incels. I think men of of a certain income level, will be incels.
Right.
Whether they call themselves MGTOWs, I guess, is something else really.
It's interesting looking at there was the great Martin Daubney piece. I'm not sure if you saw this on MGTOW, and
yes,
he spoke to Sandman actually, who's the Canadian MGTOW, who I believe said that there were a number of different MGTOW types, and so you had involuntary celibate as one, and also you then had guys who would have various one-night stands and then just move on, and or maybe do a bit of dating, but then just move on. Leonardo DiCaprio seems to fit quite well into that category, in that he appears to have a girlfriend for a few months and then just ditches her and moves on to the next one.
Onto the next lingerie supermodel.
Exactly, yes,
But I mean, how many men wouldn't if they had the chance? The point is that they don't have the chance.
I think so. I think that, is obviously it's a small number of men who engage in that lifestyle generally, and who do quite well with it. And whereas I think a lot of MGTOW don't fit into that category, and just get on with their life. And I'd say a lot don't actually have that much to do with women. And
but it's also it takes out so much stress in your life, doesn't it?
Right.
If you don't have an intimate relationship with a woman,
yes,
apart from yourself, Elizabeth, obviously, which I don't have. Darren has.
To be clear.
Need to be very clear on that.
Disclaimer.
But certainly, when I look back to my two marriages, I mean, they were both good women. But my God, the amount of stress that came, that sort of came with that. I don't miss that.
From divorce, or just from
from the marriage?
From the marriage.
No.
The divorce was a stress-free bit.
I wouldn't quite say that, but no, just the. I suppose we're sort of moving off the thing a bit, maybe, but the sheer emotional. What's the word? I mean, women are very emotionally demanding of their, at least some are, of their intimate partners, and. I just found that it was just a lot to bear, and so, I mean,
I wonder if that's changed because obviously communities used to be built around really large families, and women had big communities of other women who were all kind of would see each other an awful lot and kind of support each other. And now we've moved into this kind of nuclear family system where women might not have other people to rely on. Maybe they're relying on their partners more for that reason.
Which goes back to your point about the Naomi Wolf,
and then
the demands made on men.
One man needs
men don't
to
have
fulfill every single need that you could possibly ever have, ever.
And then they start making ridiculous
and
demands out of their husband,
there's
like
no
he has
demand
to
too
watch
ridiculous.
Strictly Come Dancing or something, and I've ever said shows like this.
And I think especially if men are, introverted men, which I'm an introvert, find that level of demand really, really exhausting. Which is one of the themes of my book, The Fraud of the Rings.
Yes,
which is still available on Amazon.
Okay,
So I'll get that.
Just explain your point a bit more.
Okay. Well, in The Fraud of the Rings, which I wrote in 2009, I was making the point that. I should explain where it came from. After my second divorce, I felt I needed to understand why there was something about marriage which just absolutely killed me, and I couldn't say it's this woman or that woman. There was just something intrinsically difficult about it for me, and the thesis I eventually developed after reading 40 or 50 books to kind of understand all this stuff was that there are 3 marriage risk factors. And the more of them you have, then the more danger there is for the marriage to not be successful. And the first was introversion, which half the population roughly has. That day-to-day emotional demands for an introvert is just really difficult to take. I think. I mean, some introverts have happy marriages and they work it out, but it is a risk factor. The second one, I think, is not sharing the same sort of traditional religious values as a partner, which I guess is true of most couples, certainly in the UK today. Because I think religion, although I'm an atheist, religion is a binding thing, and if you believe that God actually wants you to be together, that's pretty powerful stuff. And the third marriage risk factor, which may be the biggest of the 3, is being a man. It is, monogamy is a deeply unnatural state for a man. Yes, men will commit themselves to it, and many successfully so. But it's not a natural thing. I don't think so. And so I had like all 3 risk factors,
I see.
which kind of explained to me why why I'd had two divorces, you know. But yeah, so.
I think it is.
Can we just quickly go back to the Martin Daubney article? Did he mention any other categories of MGTOW?
So there was men who won't marry, but who do long-term cohabiting.
Oh, right,
but aside from that, there's also men who won't get into a long-term relationship with women.
No, I mean,
but,
what I was particularly wondering about
Yeah.
was whether he'd mentioned this kind of demographic of married MGTOW, and cohabiting MGTOW, because I think they're really interesting. And I mean, every married man should be MGTOW, really.
Yeah, it's quite hard to be MGTOW, I guess, if you're married.
I think it's,
because you're at the mercy of the
married,
system then, so.
Well, yeah, but,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. The axe is still, the sort of Damocles is still above you.
Yeah, and I think that makes it difficult to communicate. Like, if you're at these crisis points in relationships that I've been talking about, I wonder how a man can feel free to talk honestly.
Yeah.
When he knows that the woman kind of has this gun to his head,
yes.
Theoretically, even if, the truth is that she doesn't and she would never consider using it, he
It's
doesn't
there.
know that
It's
because,
there.
he's not her. And so that must be really difficult to navigate. But I don't think it's impossible to be a married
It's pretty much down to the woman. It's pretty much down to the woman, though, isn't it? I mean, the woman has the power, and that to me has got to be really, that is not healthy. When there's that much power,
it's not healthy.
It's interesting you use the power. I think you said that, she has a gun to his head, and yes, she may pull the trigger, she may not, but that is deeply unhealthy, I think, for the relationship to know that she has that power, because it makes it so he has to be servile, doesn't he? Or he has to be somewhere on that continuum.
There would definitely be a kind of self-preservation instinct to be servile and not to criticise too harshly. Which is not going to do anyone any favours if you're at a crisis point in a relationship.
For a lot of men, they're not aware of the material that we've read or looked into, so I guess they're even more ostracised in that way.
Very few men don't know someone who's been, dragged through divorce courts or family courts and, over hot coals kind of thing. So I think it's rare the man who would not be scared of such a thing.
But it's the knowledge of having, or the power of having the knowledge of, what we've looked into, seeing, actually looking at the situation and reading various books and seeing how much it's all degenerated. And I'd like to, I haven't brought it up so far in any of my talks, but I did a Facebook post about this, and so I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because with if you have a man who's MGTOW or incel, it doesn't get involved in many relationships, then he's usually shamed for it, and he's usually, he's said that he's beneath contempt and so on and so forth, but then there's a complete lack of focus on women who also don't get into long-term relationships, who aren't married, who don't have children. And I mean, all we hear is a bit of, well, she's a poor, unfortunate soul. But generally, there's a complete lack of focus on such women. And I do think that it's a lot of women who find themselves in this boat. And so the post I did was, it was actually talking to a number of women in healthcare, which is my profession, and just hearing the same story 3 times in a number of weeks. And the story is a woman in her late 40s, early 50s, saying that she can't find a man, she can't find a partner. She's really concerned about getting old or, growing old alone, not having any kids. And I heard this story like 3 times in literally as many weeks. And the last time was probably the most depressing, because it was this lady who was exactly this predicament, late 40s, and she was saying that, well, it was coming up to Valentine's Day, and she was saying she didn't have a partner, she didn't have any kids, you know, she was concerned about growing old alone. But with Valentine's Day coming up, she said her plan was to book a table for herself,
Right.
and to go to this restaurant on her own and basically have a Valentine's dinner on her own.
That's so sad, isn't it?
Yeah, well,
That's
there's
really sad.
I mean, there's the other. Have you seen that new kind of trend for women
marry
marrying
themselves.
themselves?
Right,
Yeah.
or their pets or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Or a stone.
I don't think that's quite legal yet, although if women whine enough, it may be.
Marrying yourself, I mean, that is the ultimate narcissistic act, isn't it?
Yes, I think it's this, I'd say what it is like in their 20s, a lot of women, I think, become like high on their own sense of entitlement that they get from the fact that they are pretty and they have a lot of sexual power.
Yeah.
But then obviously just the issue that they do hit the wall when they get to mid-30s, and they do lose their fertility, and they've not really had this really important lesson taught to them before. Instead, they just find out at that point that, oh yeah, all of that sexual market value you had before, yeah, it's now gone. And yeah, so sorry about that, but yeah, you don't have that anymore. So almost hardly any men will be attracted to you now, and so you have to get by on your character now. So you know,
Which
you haven't actually developed
on.
that.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
But good luck anyway. Yeah.
Can we talk at all? Because you know, I think one of the big important things that, or questions that has come up for me in reading a lot of Peter Wright's work on MGTOW, is that, you know, human pair bonding does what's the word? It fulfills needs that people have, like for, you know, human bonding and affection, not to mention sex. And, you know, I think if you're going to go MGTOW, you need to think very seriously about how you're going to fulfill those needs, actually. And so, you know, do you think that MGTOWs are they taking it seriously enough, you know, or are they thinking that they can get by on like porn and video games? And is that going to be sustainable? Is that going to be good for their mental health? And, you know, what kind of
And sex dolls are coming, of course.
answers are there? Yeah, the future is female sex robots. Yeah.
Super advanced AI female sex robots who hopefully don't try and take over the world. But yeah.
But I suppose the options are down to the individual's money, isn't it? I guess. I mean, if you've got a gazillion pounds in the bank, then you know you're not going to be short of sex, are you? If you've got £2.40, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say that's probably the least of all of the issues, to be honest, you know, and the one that's got the most options. I would think that it's like the affection, you know, because there's like conditions like skin hunger, where if people aren't touched at all, they're likely to die sooner and get stressed and depressed, you know, and so where's that going to come from, and where is the human bonding going to come from?
But I think men do harden themselves to that. It is kind of sad, but you know, if you know, what options does a man have? You know, if he can't.
Well, I mean,
you know,
here,
it kind of goes with being MGTOW, doesn't it? At least those MGTOWs that don't have the money to pay for sex, I guess. And I think, you know, you can get used to things.
Can you?
I mean, it's not. It's absolutely not
I'd really
ideal.
like to see, you know, kind of studies on like. I've got a lot of questions about MGTOW. You know, I want to know how prevalent it actually is. I want to know whether MGTOWs are more or less likely to have grown up with fathers. You know, and I'd also like to know about their mental health. You know, like there are kind of some options that Peter Wright suggests here that, you know, a man, he needs to satisfy his attachment needs with close friends, you know, and that's one of the really kind of exciting aspects of MGTOW, is the kind of potential
Male
for the
bonding.
brotherhood.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Although, you know, I think the kind of MGTOW sectarians can get a bit not very friendly to other men, to be honest, and I'm not sure they've got the kind of brotherhood thing. And, you know, also family, a pet, you know, men and their dogs are a beautiful thing. And then the kind of parental instincts and that kind of meaning, he suggests that they can teach school children, work in daycare centre, care for the disabled, mentor a fatherless child, coaching Little League, looking after orphaned animals, you know, and I think that MGTOW men do need to kind of consider doing these things, which are going to be a lot of work, but I think they will give meaning to their lives.
I think yeah, you try and get meaning in your life wherever you can, and I guess a lot of men have found themselves pushed into this category. Others have more choice, but find they're moving in that direction anyway. And I think in terms of a general solution to this issue, I personally believe that traditionalism is the answer, and that is it's where we need to head back towards as a civilization.
No. I mean, it very much depends. Like, if you're talking about traditionalism that is, you know, men having their own spaces to bond, like, you know, their own saloon bars and their own kind of clubs and fraternities, then, like, yeah, definitely.
I guess I mean
1950s
traditionalism.
Well, you know, that's what Peter Wright would call a gyno marriage, that's based on the kind of needs and wants of a woman. And I don't think we need to go back to that at all. I
don't think the 50s specifically, from what I've seen, was. I mean, I think there was some gynocentric elements to it, but equally there was a lot more promotion of, say, male space. And also, if you have the, for instance, you know, there's that old, like the feminists take the piss out of this all the time. Like the advert of the woman saying that she's, you know, making herself look pretty, and she's doing all of the dishes and cleaning the house so that it's nice and tidy when her man comes home. I think there's, I mean, the feminists say, oh my God, you know, what these horrible or these oppressed women, you know, they were obviously brainwashed and broken. But I actually think that that's quite a nice image in a way, because it is them working constructively to prop up their man.
And there's plenty of women in work today that would give their back teeth to be housewives.
Oh, yeah,
stay-at-home mothers. Can we just touch on age very quickly?
Yeah.
In relation to, I mean, I think, Elizabeth, you make very good points about skin hunger and sex and so on. But I think, I mean, you know, can I speak as a man of 60, that you kind of get used to celibacy. You know, it kind of becomes your norm.
I think that is the least of all the concerns.
Yeah. But with that goes, I guess, you know, this sort of skin hunger thing, and I kind of understand that, but you don't tend to, at least I don't, pine for something that I know is not going to happen. It's just like, it's the new reality, and yeah, I mean, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you know, I do think that kind of 50s marriage was very much based on like male chivalry, and you know, men making the first move and men being the providers, you know, whether or not they wanted to. And I don't think that's not something I want to go back to.
But men still have to make the first move today, and if they get it wrong, it's sexual harassment.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and there you go. That's your traditionalism for you. That's neo-traditionalism.
I mean, there's a few things I like about it. One is, firstly, I'd say the idea of there being a particular space for men and for women, and it being a different space, and men being primarily located out in the public sphere, the region where they have more dominance, and women being more located in domestic or local community sphere, and then having more dominance there. And then there's not a clash of heads in either of these two locations.
There's not competition, there's cooperation.
Yes, yeah.
And that's and men are happier, children are happier.
Well, I mean, more men are work-centred, but they're not all work-centred, and there's a lot who would relish the opportunity to spend more time with their children and stuff like that, and they should certainly be free to do that. And I think it needs to be worked out on a case-by-case basis. We need to be having, people in relationships, whether they're married or cohabiting, if they've got kind of kids especially, need to be a real union of kind of their hearts and minds and values and goals, and work together. Whereas now, I think a lot of the time it's like we make decisions for the household based on what women want, and men's needs don't really get a look in, which is what Peter Wright calls gyno marriage, and he compares that with this bio marriage, which sounds much healthier.
Okay. Okay. I mean, just as a, final point for me, I suppose it's the thing I think we're lacking, and I do feel that men, in a way, most of them are kind of more happy. Well, they're happier if they're out actually being protectors and providers, and then coming back to, say, the domestic sphere, and the woman is there kind of looking after that.
Yeah, there's definitely always going to be those trends.
Yeah.
Even if you try and socially engineer them away.
Sure. Because it's just that she's looking after that space and making sure it's a good space for, say, for children and for pets, and the home becomes a place of life.
And a place of sanctuary for him.
Which then gives him and his life meaning. The fact that he is making all of that money, say, out in the public sphere, but then he comes back home and there is a reason for his existence when he gets back home.
As long as he's happy in that, that's fine.
Yes, yeah.
I think most men are. I mean, you look at, let's say I'm not religious, but I'm always fascinated by documentaries of the Amish, and you look at their, I mean, really pretty well as extreme male and female gender roles as you can, and the women are happy.
Yeah.
My God, they're a damn sight happier than most working women, I'd suggest, and the men are happy. I'm not saying it's for
lowest violence rates in the world.
Yeah, of course it's not for everyone, but it is fascinating to see that you would expect most men and women to be happy in traditional gender roles.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, all the evidence I've seen is that is over decades, as women have moved into the workplace, they've become less happier.
Oh yeah.
Over that time.
The
stats are really clear on that. And yet that's government policy to drive ever more women into work, to replace men in work.
It's what they say they want. And government's full of men.
Well, it's what feminists say they want.
Well, yeah.
But 6 out of 7 women are not work-centred. So.
No, I think it's a horrible situation we have now. But I mean, like you've spoken about this, so you think we're heading towards peak feminism, and so we're going to see the movement. I guess recently we saw the Christine Blasey Ford situation in
that
the US.
Cheered me right up.
And
I mean, it was a horrendous spectacle.
It was.
But when the results came in and they were the right results, and after as well, the feminists have been saying this is the peak of the Me Too movement, and it was like, wow, you want to stop a guy becoming a Supreme Court justice over an unsubstantiated claim by one woman that doesn't even sound plausible, and so to see that fail for them was a thing of beauty.
It was a glorious moment.
It also gave Trump an opportunity to talk about how it was a scary place for young men in the US at that point, and then I saw Melania on TV saying, she was asked if she supports the women of the Me Too movement, and she said, yeah, of course I support women, and then she said, but I support men too. You know, and then she talked about the need for evidence when there's allegations, and it's like that. It was really, really encouraging. I mean, I never would have expected to see such a pro-male president and first lady.
No. No.
I think it's absolutely brilliant, actually, and that's what we've seen there is a completely, you know, the kind of leftist rape culture monster has been revealed, and you know, in all of its hideous, nightmarish detail, and the Republican establishment over there and Fox News media and so many voices have just said, no, this is ridiculous. You know, this is a disgusting anti-male, anti-Republican fake news agenda, and for me, it's really heartening to see all of the Trump tweets, which, in my view, could have been written by Paul Elam. You know, they were so.
He's probably
They could have actually. They could
well,
have.
well, of course, Paul's an advisor to Trump. But,
Yeah.
but you know, I mean, that must not be revealed in this video. Of course.
Right. And I just hope to see. I'm seeing, within the populist movement here in the UK, that there is much more of an anger at feminism, at the rape culture, Me Too campaigns, at you know, more knowledge, burgeoning knowledge of what feminism has actually done, and so I just hope that more people see it and they get their heads out of the you know, get away from watching the BBC and they just start watching decent information, you know, provided by anti-feminists, and just start regarding the situation clearly. And also, obviously, it's just men as well. They just need to stop being so pathetic. And
they need to strap a pair on, basically.
Yeah.
That's a solution.
Okay, well...
Men, strap a pair on.
Okay, well, thank you for your time, guys.
Thank you.
Excellent interview, and let's do it again another time.
Definitely.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.